You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. What's next is an extraordinary story of tragedy and survival. It's one of the deadliest local climbing accidents in recent memory. 4 men fell roughly 400 feet while climbing in the North Cascades on May 10th. One man survived. Anton Tselykh told Okanagan County Search and Rescue that after his group fell nearly 200 feet and tumbled 200 more, he lay unconscious for several hours. He came to, suffering from internal bleeding and a head injury, pulled himself out of the ice and snow and hiked to his car and drove 40-odd miles to find a payphone to call 911. Tselykh was taken to Harborview. His 3 friends have since been identified. They ranged in age from 36 to 63. This tragedy has caused grief and prompted questions in the local climbing community. And while some of the accident's details are still unclear, it made us wonder about the impact of a loss like this on climbers, rock climbing safety, and what climbers should know about the North Cascades. So let's bring in James Pierson for more. He's the director of operations for the American Alpine Institute, which is based in Bellingham. James, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Libby.
So I want to start with your first impressions. When you heard about what had happened in the North Cascades, what were you thinking about?
Well, like with any of these accidents, you're like, oh my gosh, what a tragedy. What happened? What went wrong? It's trying to start piecing the puzzle together. The climbing community, not just in Bellingham and the North Cascades, but I think in general, has done a really good job of looking at incidents like this. And a lot of times you say, like, oh my God, what happened? But it's not with a sense of incredulousness. You're like, what happened? Like you're asking us with a sense of inquisitiveness, trying to figure out, where things went sideways.
Basically, you're not trying to blame anybody. You're trying to simply understand and prevent it from happening. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so tough, and there's so much minutia in. It's impossible to sit here as an armchair quarterback and make judgment calls, because you don't know what was going through the heads of the climbers, what the conditions were. But we can try, gathering as much of these details and bits of information we can, and try to piece together, what the decision-making process was, and try and learn from that and move forward, and in hopes of something like this doesn't happen again.
So this was the North Early Winters Spire, which is near Blue Lake, if I understand the map correctly. I've hiked around there, but the climbing world is a completely different thing that I'm not familiar with. I understand you had been skiing in the area just a few weekends ago. For those who haven't been out there, what is this climbing area like, and what are the conditions like around this time of year?
So, if anyone has driven from kind of Seattle area to Mazama or Twisp via North Cascades Highway, they've driven right past this and may not even have known it. But there's a tight hairpin as you're kind of coming down over Washington Pass area, and it's the large formation just off to the west of that hairpin turn. A lot of the climbs in that formation come up from, like you said, that Blue Lake Trailhead on the west side of the formation. But this group of individuals, they came up on the east side. A lot of people are saying this is a rock climb, and it's at this time of the year, it's more of a snow and ice climb with a little bit of rock in there. It's much more mixed than what a normal quote unquote rock climber would be doing. This takes a set of more defined skills in alpine climbing, mountaineering, things like that. So yeah, at this time of year, like you said, it's a mix of snow and ice and rock in there.
What's the difficulty level if you had to give us a sense from a beginner to expert?
Yeah, according to Mountain Project, which is kind of an online repository and almost like a digital guidebook, they rate this as a 5.6, AI 2 to 3, M4 plus, A1. And so I can try to break that jargon down for you. So 5.6 is part of the Yosemite decimal system for rock climb grades. Most people would consider that beginner plus level. The AI 2 to 3, that refers to alpine ice 2 to 3, and that goes up to usually like 5 or 6 is the general kind of max is what you'd see in a rating scale for that. M4 means mixed climbing. So that means they're using their alpine ice climbing tools like crampons and ice axes on the rock to help move up through that. And then the last A1, that stands for aid climbing. Aid climbing is when you're placing a piece of protection and usually like putting a sling or something in that and standing up on that for vertical progression. Um, so yeah, with this climb, there is sometimes a little bit of aid that is necessary depending on the conditions and things like that. Sometimes it gets snowed or iced in and you can climb through it, but other times you might need to place something and move forward. So
We are still trying to get more details here. So these are initial reports that the Okanagan Sheriff's Department has shared with outlets like the Seattle Times and King 5. They spoke with Anton, the survivor of this accident. What is your initial impression of what may have gone wrong here, James?
when I started like reading through these, the thing that jumped out was it sounded like they were all on a single piece of equipment, a single piece of gear, a single piece of protection. And after reading through some of these, like some questions started to pop into my head and formulate about, okay, where were they at in the progression of their descent? Who was rappelling? Where were the other people? Things like that. And then late yesterday afternoon, I read Anton's description of the events, and it sounds like they had decided to turn around. It was getting late. It started snowing again, and had actually done a series of rappels already. And then we're at this rappel station, and someone was on rappel. The anchor piece that they were all attached to failed, and it pulled the rest of the team down. And from the accounts that we've got so far, the thing that kind of stands out is it sounds like they were all on a single piton. A piton is a piece of metal. It's basically a wedge that's driven into a crack in the rock. They were common in kind of like the golden age of climbing in Yosemite, as they would pound those into the rock, clip into it, and climb on past.
These are placed by fellow climbers that came before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're usually part of a larger system of progression. They're not used as frequently anymore in most standard climbing because they do kind of scar up the rock, things like that. However, the one place that they are frequently used in is more alpine routes like this, where those other kind of more common pieces of protections just don't fit or the conditions don't allow them. So if a crack is really wet or icy, a standard nut or a camming device might not hold very well. So someone would pound one of these into the crack or the fissure and use that as the piece of protection. And it's like I said, it's often used as protection on the way up. On the way down, the concern here is that it sounds like they had found a series of these pitons and were using them as single point anchors. It's not commonly used solely by itself in that kind of setting.
It's not recommended if you come across a piton to use that as your single point of safety, basically, for your ropes.
Yeah, especially when everyone's going to be on it like that. What's commonly happens is you'll find one and you'll back it up with another piece of protection and use it from there. That being said, though, I haven't been up there. I don't know where this piton was. It could be that this was the only thing that was available, and they just had to make the best of what they could with it.
Like the other gear, the other possibilities of backup simply wouldn't work.
Just wouldn't have worked. Yeah, if everything else was iced up, and they didn't have any other pieces to place in there, they did the best with what they could. It's like I said, I haven't been up there, so I can only speculate.
In general, when you are climbing, and again, we are learning more details about this climb in particular, but when you're talking to climbers about safety and they come across a piton like this, how do you approach it? How do you know if you can trust it with your life?
The challenge is that the Cascades has a pretty long history of climbing. People have been climbing there for quite a while, and they're can be, I mean, definitely in that whole group of peaks there. There definitely are routes where there's old pitons that are in there. I've clipped them myself, but I'm usually clipping them as a part of a larger system. And it's tough because, you have no idea when someone might have placed this unless you place it yourself, how old it is with the rock that we have, being outside and exposed to the elements, the rock's going through these series of freeze thaw cycles of expansion and contraction. What might have been a solid placement, at the time might not be that great anymore. What you can do is, if you have a tool that has a hammer or a head on it, you can pound on the piton and they make like a distinct sound as you're placing them in. It starts with a low pitch kind of ring, and as you pound it in, the pitch gets higher and higher and higher. And
You can actually hear it
you can
become
actually hear
safer.
the difference. Yeah.
Wow.
Think of like I'm trying to equate this to something else for the general public, but for a lot of climbers, you pound on rock, and if you hear like a low kind of vibration, kind of rumble to it, or any kind of vibration, really, it's you can tell that it's not a solid. Versus if you pound on a solid piece of rock, you're not going to hear anything. So kind of similar with this is when you're first putting in it, it vibrates a lot, so it's a lower pitch to it, and as it gets pounded in, there's less and less vibration. It gets a higher pitch.
So ideally, you would, if you come across a piton like this, you would either test it or, I mean, from what I'm hearing you say, you would always want to have a backup for it if you were going to be clipping it.
Ideally, yeah, you would have something in there. What can commonly, like if they were going to use this as a single point, or if I was in this situation and I came across this and it was going to rappel off of it, I probably would have, clipped my rope into it, set up my rappel, but then had another piece that was backed up into it. And I guess that's also one of the things that I was looking at when my mind started going like, okay, was there anything else attached to it? The reports from the sheriff's department said that when they were recovering the other fallen climbers, they noticed that the piton was still clipped to the rope, and so it struck me that they didn't mention that there was anything else to it, anything else that was clipped to it.
Yeah. And we should note accidents like this are very rare, especially something that would claim 3 lives in the North Cascades like this. When you talk to climbers about safety, what sort of lessons are you going to be drawing from something like this? Is it about route planning? Is it about conditions? Or will the piton sort of be the top of the conversation when it comes to safety for the future?
Well, unfortunately, with really most of these incidents in the mountains, anyone that's read the publication from the American Alpine Club, North Accents in North American Climbing, you'll see almost universally, it's not a singular catastrophic event. There's usually a series of small little things that kind of lead up to a final decision being made, and it's one of those decisions that has this catastrophic end to it. So trying to figure out, what were the series of decisions that led to this? Was it the weather? Was it the group size? Was it the route selection? Like, what was it? And it's usually this cascading, this snowball effect, and before the climbers know it, they're up against a really tough objective or something like that, or a really tough decision. And so it's trying to decipher what that thought process was, looking at the mental games that we play with ourselves. Sometimes it's a matter of, oh man, this is my only weekend available, so I've got to make the most of this. And so you push yourself a little bit farther, a little bit harder, a little bit longer. Or, oh, I've been up this route a dozen times before. I know that it's safe. Or, I'm going to ski this slope. I've been up here 100 times. I've never seen an avalanche before, so it's probably fine. Or, there's all these little mental games that we play with ourselves to justify a decision. And especially in the avalanche safety world, when I first kind of got into the industry, it was, getting your head in the snow and looking at snow crystals and things like that. And that's still a part of it, but the curriculum, especially for newer folks is a big chunk of it is looking at those mental traps that we get into. Why do you push yourself this far? Where is the lack of communication? What's the communication breakdown within your group? Why wasn't the dissenting person listened to when the decision was made? Things like that. Um, so that's probably where I would hope that the community like tries to take this and looking at that background and that lead up to the whole process. Yes, the piton thing is going to be a major point for all of this. It's easy to really point a finger at that as being the cause, but what led the group to make that decision that a single piton was okay.
Yeah.
So
Just before we go, James, for those of us who are not in the climbing world, when we hear about something like this, sometimes it's hard for us to understand pursuing a sport that does contain this sort of risk. Why do you love climbing? Why do you go into the mountains? And what does a great climb feel like that drives you to keep going?
yeah, it's the funny thing is that it can be different for every person, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. No matter where you're at in your progression as a climber, whether you're, just buying your first pair of mountaineering boots or you've been doing it for years and years and years, you can make it whatever you want to out of it. If it's just getting out with friends, that's great. If it's finding something that motivates you and pushes you to get out there and train and be better and get stronger, that's great. If it's just being in nature, that's great. And for me, I think it's a combination of all those things. To be able to look at an objective and do all the planning and question your abilities both mentally and physically. And sometimes you get shut down because you're not as ready as you thought you were, and sometimes you achieve, and then it's on to the next thing. And it can be this driving force in people that pushing themselves and pushing themselves and pushing themselves. And sometimes they push too far and things happen, and sometimes they push too far and nothing happens. That is one of the kind of downsides with this is sometimes we don't get the feedback that we've pushed too hard. But for the most part, I would say the rewards are far, far outweigh kind of the detriment of this. Being able to shut out the outside world, have a quiet mind, and just focus on these next 5, 10, 15 feet right in front of you. Having the bond with your partner. When I started climbing, I joined the Mountaineers. I lived down in the Olympia area, and there was a group of us that, kind of did everything together, and it was really great. And two of the people, fell in love, got married, had kids, and now I'm like Uncle James. We hang out, every few weeks or months. I'll go down and visit, and I'm part of the family there, and it is a family. It's being able to talk to a relative stranger that you saunter up to the crag and have this common verbiage and language and can talk about experiences and share this with someone that had only met a couple minutes ago. It's really cool, and it's a really great bonding experience. And if you're listening to this and you're not a climber, I encourage you to give it a try, even if it might be scary. Like I said, no matter where you are, you can find a place for you, whether it's just climbing in the gym, going bouldering, getting out in the wilderness, whatever the case may be.
James Pierson is the Director of Operations for the American Alpine Institute, which is based in Bellingham. James, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.